Sherlock Holmes will be back again next week here on Radio 5. That'll be at the same time of 9:30.
The Unopened Casebook of Sherlock Holmes. 6 extraordinary adventures written by John Taylor, with Simon Callow as Sherlock Holmes and Nicky Henson as Dr. John Watson. The 6th adventure, the Battersea Worm.
Long before I knew Sherlock Holmes, Caspar Holland and I were fellow students at medical school. I had heard that he had since set up a practice in London, but we had rather lost touch. So I was more than surprised to receive one day a letter inviting me to the house in Battersea he shared with his father, Angel Holland, the retired climber. The trip, the letter told me, would cost me 5 days of my time, but would be a rewarding one. And if I wished to find out more, I must make my way there immediately. I thought this most audacious of Holland, but before I could write a letter telling him so, curiosity got the better of me. I packed a bag, summoned a cab, and went to Battersea without delay.
Watson, my dear chap, what a joy to see you again. Was it a good journey? Isn't it a fine old house? Oh, here, let me take your hat. I expect you'd like some tea. Forgive me. As you see, I haven't changed. Still talk too much. It's good of you to come, old man. Oh, I see you've spotted the contraption.
What on earth is it? Appears to go to the very top of the house.
Oh, this tower, yes. You might describe it as a monument to Elisha Graves Otis.
Holland, what are you talking about?
It's a passenger elevating machine. For short, say, elevator or passenger lift. Otis is the chap who invented them. They're very fashionable in the United States of America.
Good Lord. But no stairs.
And for a very sound reason. At least my poor father thinks it's sound. Come, we'll have tea in the library. There I shall explain everything. Still like muffins, Watson?
I dare say you're thinking back to the day when I ate 11 at one sitting. But thank you, yes. Your father isn't joining us?
Oh, he never comes down, I'm afraid.
Comes down?
From his room up in that tower. He's been there for more than 2 years.
But why?
Fear, Watson, if you can believe that of a man who has been a hero, who has scaled the world's most awesome peaks. Yes, he is the prisoner of fear. 2 years ago, he asked me to move back here to live with him. He charged me with the task of running the house and its 3 servants, and from that time he has never been out of his room, and hardly anyone but I has ever been in it. Moreover, when he heard about this American liftman Otis, he put out an advertisement for competent engineers to install such an elevator here at Barrowfields. You see the point of it, I dare say.
Well, so that nobody can sneak up unseen, I imagine. But why does he fear for his life?
Well, I dare say he will tell you all in his own good time. If, that is, you take up the offer.
What offer?
I have had no holiday for 2 years. You'll remember I like to climb myself in a small way, but Father wouldn't let me leave him. Well, finally, I pleaded for a few days away, promising to find another medical man, someone he knew, to take over in my absence. When he heard that I had you in mind, he agreed. What do you say, Watson? Will you do it?
Well, now that I'm here, I see no reason why not. I always liked your father immensely. It'll be good to see him again.
Capital. I shall go off to my rocks, comfortable in the knowledge that the old gentleman is safe in your hands. Now, come and say hello to him.
We'll be going up in that, lift?
Well, I'm afraid it's unavoidable. It is the only way up and the only way down. But you'll love it, Watson, I'm certain. Here we are, John. Surely the world's most extravagant invention. Within 50 years, nobody anywhere will have to lift a leg to walk up a staircase. And here is Mr. Cuthbert.
Good day to you, Dr. Holland.
Mr. Cuthbert, this is Dr. Watson. He'll be looking after things while I'm away.
Pleased to meet you, Doctor.
Indeed.
You'll see quite a bit of Mr. Cuthbert, Watson. He comes in 2 or 3 times a week to maintain the machinery on the elevator.
I'm most impressed with it.
The tallest passenger elevator in the country, Doctor.
Really?
82 feet from the bottom of the shaft to the top and safer than a baby's perambulator. What's more, I check it every other day to make sure it stays safe.
And how is it operated? I see no switches.
Only from the inside, Doctor.
Huh?
Father's way of ensuring that no one can get up into the tower without his knowledge. I brought the elevator down this morning, and until I return, he can be certain he is alone. When Mr. Cuthbert has finished here, I shall take you up.
I won't be another minute, Dr. Holland. Then I'll just need to check the head of the shaft up there.
Meanwhile, John, I'll show you the speaking tube. Blow down here, and my father hears a whistle up in the tower, provided he is awake and willing to reply.
Yes?
Father, it's me. Watson has arrived from London.
Excellent. Bring him up at once.
Oh, and Mr. Cuthbert needs to check the top of the elevator shaft.
Very well.
You must always let him know if anybody is going up or coming down with you.
All finished here, Dr. Holland.
Then, shall we get in?
Certainly.
Perhaps you'll show Dr. Watson how to drive it, Mr. Cuthbert.
Not much to it, really, Doctor. The engine's already pumping away. All we need do is throw that handle that engages the cage with the gears. All yours, Doctor.
What? Just...
That's it.
Good Lord. Mr. Cuthbert, this is a miracle.
Not bad, Doctor, is it?
It's Watson, Father.
John Watson, do you remember me?
Don't be ridiculous, man. Of course I remember you. I'm not senile yet, you know. Now, tell me what you think of my ivory tower.
It is very pleasant. An entirely circular room. Wonderful view. Like being up in a balloon.
It is my home, but it is also my fortress.
Indeed it would. I imagine it'd be difficult to climb this tower from the outside.
It is quite proof against that, my boy. You could take my word. You see the ledge that runs around the tower just beneath the windows? It is an overhang impossible to negotiate from beneath. And besides, the brickwork is glazed and greased.
I can see why you feel secure here.
So long as nothing unauthorized comes up in that lift, I'm safe enough. And if I'm a prisoner in my own home, well, what of it? I'm fond of the place. Now then, Casper, you'll be off this evening.
Directly after supper, Father.
Well, I shall miss you. But in your absence, there are no hands I'd rather be in than young Watson's here. Thank you again for coming, John. I'll see you rewarded for it.
My pleasure, sir.
Oh, that'll be Cuthbert, the lift man.
Well, open the door, would you, Casper? Sorry to disturb you, gentlemen. I'm finished for today, but I'll need to come back tomorrow with a spare top wheel for the governor cable. Ought to be sooner rather than later. I was wondering, is tomorrow convenient?
Oh, well, you must ask Dr. Watson. As from this evening, he is in charge.
Oh, tomorrow will be quite convenient.
Excellent. And now, Father, I shall escort Mr. Cuthbert and John back into the house. I shall see you before I leave.
If you don't, I shall never speak to you again.
At about 5 that afternoon, my friend Casper Holland went to catch a late train to Elder's Edge in Berkshire to begin his holiday. Having checked on the old man, I retired early to bed with a perplexing question on my mind. First thing next morning, I made acquaintance with the 3 servants. Mrs. Callender, the cook, was most welcoming to me, and even Jethro, the odd job boy, was amiable in his insolence. Only Mrs. Fowler, the housekeeper, took an instant dislike to me. By about 11 in the morning, I'd made a decision. I had Mrs. Callender make some coffee, entered the lift, and ascended to Angel Holland's round room in the sky. I'd made up my mind to ask him directly about his reasons for locking himself away.
The coffee is not at all bad, is it, John?
Excellent.
She's a good sort, Mrs. Callender. Oh, she prepares a very acceptable venison steak, which, incidentally, is not so unlike moose. I don't suppose you've tried moose?
No.
No, I had some once while climbing in Canada.
You've had some remarkable adventures. Casper told me many stories when we were sharing rooms. But I never understood why you gave up climbing, or why you chose to shut yourself away here.
Casper hasn't explained.
He said you preferred strangers not to know.
Ah, God bless the boy, I did say that. Never thought he'd respect the secret, though. Well, John, you shall hear everything. I hope it won't make you think too badly of me. It's not a pleasant tale, that's for sure. There were 4 of us, climbing in Scotland near Caen Toul. MacAndrew and Thorne had accompanied me on many expeditions. Brave men of good sense. Not so Jack Laslett. Oh, a clever enough climber, but intolerably self-opinionated and ambitious. All the way to the top there were disputes and arguments. Laslett against the rest of us, always wanting his own way. Then, as we began to descend, so did the weather. You know how fast it can change on the slopes. Visibility became dreadful. Suddenly, it seemed as if our path down the mountain had been obliterated.
Thorne! Your best guess! That pass! The crow-shaped rock. I seem to remember it.
Nonsense! It's that way! Along the ravine!
MacAndrew!
Thorne's right! The Crow Rock!
Then into the main valley!
No!
What say you, Angel? The Crow Rock. That's it, then. 3 for the Crow Rock.
Idiot! Go that way and you'll be lost forever!
We voted, Laslett!
Aye! Voted for death!
Where are you going?
This way! The right way!
Laslett, you won't make it!
I'll make it! It's you who won't make it!
Come back!
The hell I will! Damn you, Thorne! And the rest of you!
What a terrible night we had on that mountain, John. We thought we were dead men, to be sure, and I know not by what good fortune we found our way to the foot of the peak. But, broken as we were, we at least got home. Jack Laslett did not. They found him later the next day, frozen to death in a crevasse. But the worst of it...
Yes, Mr. Holland?
The worst of it was that Laslett's route down the mountain had been the correct one. We might, had we followed him, all have been saved.
Good Lord.
It was a few months later that the letters began to arrive. Venomous, hateful letters to each of us from poor Laslett's widow, now left alone with a 10-year-old son. The worm of vengeance... These were her very words to me. The worm of vengeance will find you, Angel Holland, wherever you run. Well, after that, all went quiet, and we thought that the madness had passed. Then 2 years ago, MacAndrew died, apparently of a fall in his library. I was suspicious at the time, but 6 months later, when they found Thorn hanging from a tree in his garden, I knew the Revenger had returned. For there was a man who would never take his own life. And it was clear now that this dreadful woman would not stop until she had added me to her list of victims.
You never tried to talk to her?
Oh, she was long gone. I thought it wiser, anyway, to barricade myself against potential attacks. I have survived these 2 years, and I hope to go on a good deal longer. And now, John, I'm hungry. And judging by the time, luncheon should be ready.
I'll go down and collect it at once, Mr. Holland. Mrs. Fowler, is the luncheon tray not here?
Well, sir, I certainly can't see it, so unless it's gone invisible.
There's no need to take that turn. I whistled down to you half an hour past. It can't take that long to get some food onto a plate.
I'm not cook nor kitchen maid, sir. You whistle to me, I shout to the kitchen, and they do what they do in their own sweet time. Young Dr. Holland understands the problem.
Dr. Holland, unfortunately, is not here.
No, sir, and frankly, sir, I shall be more than a mite relieved when he gets back.
So will I. Meanwhile, I'll thank you to give me a little less of your insolence.
Crab's here.
What did you say, Mrs. Fowler?
I said your crab's here, sir. Your lunch.
Ah.
Here's Jethro with it now.
Here we are, Dr. Watson, sir. Dressed crab, nice and hot. Some buttered toast, cold ham and pickle, fresh bread, soup. Decanter of wine under the cover, and watch the vibrations, sir.
Thank you, Jethro.
Open the elevator door for you, sir.
Thank you.
Tea at 4 suit you and Mr. Holland, sir?
Perfectly, thank you.
Pleasure, sir. Close it, sir?
If you please.
Bon appetit to you, sir.
Heavens above. I'm not sure which is more tiresome, her insolence or his sarcastic deference. I shall not be unhappy when the time comes to return to Baker Street. Except that one has to say the food here is a trifle more interesting. Here we are, Mr. Holland. A tantalizing collation. Some crab and cold meat and a good bottle of white... Good heaven! Mr. Holland! What on earth? Mr. Holland, it's me, Watson. Mr. Holland! He's dead. Dear God, he's dead. He's dead! As soon as I had come to my senses, I had a telegraph message sent to Casper Holland and another to Sherlock Holmes, urging them to come to Battersea directly. At my bidding, Jethro called the police, and they arrived soon afterwards in the person of Inspector String, a contentious fellow who, having examined the scene of Angel Holland's death, ordered us all to gather in the drawing room. At this point, to my great relief, Holmes arrived. I can hardly tell you, dear fellow, what a thrill it gave me to see you come through that door. It's a dreadful business, and I feel responsible. I was asked here for the sole purpose of preventing this very tragedy.
I'm certain you did what you could, Watson. But tell me who all these people are. Inspector String I have met before.
Oh, those three are the servants. Mrs. Callender, the cook, Mrs. Fowler, the housekeeper, Jethro, the odd jobber.
Mm-hmm. And that fellow with the canvas bag I met on the way in?
Oh, that's Cuthbert. He had to come back today to finish a job on the passenger lift. Have you seen one before?
I know little about them from my reading and will be intrigued to see one working. But it looks as if the inspector is ready for us.
Murder, ladies and gentlemen. That is what we are dealing with here. You will know by now that Mr. Angel Holland was found dead today in his room in the tower, and I have no doubt his life was taken by another. I shall want to talk to each of you individually during the course of this afternoon and afterwards altogether. I am informed Dr. Holland has been called back from his holiday, and I would be grateful if someone would inform me as soon as he arrived.
Oh, I'll do that, sir.
Thank you, Mrs. Fowler. Dr. Watson, I should like to speak to you first.
Very well.
I'd be grateful if you would remain here. The rest of you, for now, may go.
Excuse me, Dr. Watson.
Mr. Cuthbert?
What do you think? Should I finish that job on the governor wheel, or is it all pointless now?
Well, I dare say it will have to be done at some time, especially as it's a matter of safety, but you had better wait until I can accompany you there.
Right you are, Doctor.
String will not require to see me, Watson, so I shall look round the house. Later, I'll ask you to show me this room in a tower.
The arrogance of that fellow String, Holmes, is intolerable. And I do not like the way he raises his right eyebrow at my answers to his questions.
Well, one has to admire his will, though. I had the devil's own job persuading him to let me come and inspect the scene of the crime. This is the room?
Indeed. And there he is.
Lying just as you found him.
I have moved nothing, except that I thought it proper to clear up the luncheon tray which I dropped upon finding him. There was wine and crab everywhere.
So, let us run over it all again. You and Angel Holland were alone in this room all morning. You went down in the passenger elevator to collect the luncheon, leaving Mr. Holland here alone. You waited by the elevator with Mrs. Fowler until Jethro brought the lunch from the kitchen, then you came directly up again. When you opened the door, you found that window smashed and Angel Holland lying there dead.
Yes, that is it exactly. As for the broken window, I believe String thinks it may be just a trick.
Yet there is no other way anyone could get into these tower rooms without using the elevating machine.
None. And Holmes, I was not out of this room for more than 5 minutes.
Cause of death, as it appears?
Yes, strangulation, I'm fairly sure.
And how executed?
It looks very much as if something were wrapped around his throat and tightened.
My thoughts precisely.
Well, he couldn't have done it himself.
Out of the question.
And yet no one else had the remotest opportunity.
Except one man, Watson.
Who?
Yourself.
That, I fear, is how String sees it.
Well, let's go and look around the grounds and inspect the exterior of the tower. Who knows? We may find something the inspector has overlooked. Not a pretty piece of architecture, is it?
I'm told that it is known locally as Angel's Folly, or worse, Madman's Tower. He called it his fortress, yet it was not, as it turns out, impregnable.
No, and yet look at it. The walls are sheer, the stonework is rounded, and has a glazed surface. What's the matter, Watson?
I was just thinking that Caspar Holland, like his father, is a mountaineer. It is a dreadful thought, but you don't think he might have ascended the tower himself?
Put your mind at rest. Even a first-rate climber would need to secure the rope with pegs. There's not a mark in that surface. And even if someone got as far as the ledge below the window, he would never get beyond it. No. That is not how it was done.
Then how?
Dr. Watson, sir.
Oh, we're being beckoned to the kitchen door. Who's that?
It's Mrs. Callender. You remember the cook?
Oh, yes, God. Well, let's go and see what she wants.
Dr. Watson, Mr. Holmes, I'll not keep you long. It's just that whatever that pompous policeman might think, or how Mrs. Fowler implied with her nods and winks, I know for sure it wasn't Dr. Watson who's killed Mr. Holland.
Thank you. Well, tell us what you know, Mrs. Callender, and rest assured we will make good use of it.
Well, then, sit down, sir, please.
Oh, thank you.
Now, it was this morning. I prepared luncheon for Mr. Holland and the doctor here. Jethro had helped me, and Mrs. Fowler was by the lift machine waiting. Well, I know Dr. Watson here must have already been in the lift because Mrs. Fowler shouted to us, he's on his way down. Send it through, meaning the food tray. And it was just at that moment when I went out into the garden and saw it.
Saw what, Mrs. Callender?
You see, what made me go was I'd forgotten to put a sprig of mint on the soup in the way Mr. Holland preferred it. I went out to the herb garden where you and Dr. Watson were standing just now when something caught my eye and I happened to look up at the tower. Something was there at the very top, above the window, moving at great speed onto the roof.
A man?
No, Doctor, nothing human. At first, it looked like the tail of a huge cat, but it was too thick for that. And it wasn't until an hour ago that it come to me. What I'd seen was some sort of serpent. A black serpent, or a gigantic worm. Now, I don't understand how, gentlemen, but it must be connected with Mr. Holland's death, for it was up there the very moment he died.
Thank you, Mrs. Callender. I'm quite sure it was connected. Well, we'd better let you get on now.
Well, I suppose so, sir. It's to be a large do tonight.
A large do?
Haven't you heard? The inspector wishes us all to meet over dinner, servants included, and young Mr. Holland if he's back, for he means to expose the murderer there and then.
Expose? Oh, melodrama. Cheap undergraduate theatricals.
Well, let's go ahead with the charade, Watson. It might serve our purpose. Besides, perhaps the inspector will turn out to be right, and there will be an arrest tonight.
Well, I don't see how you can arrest a snake, Mr. Holmes.
Would not be the first time, Mrs. Callender.
Oh, well, sir, I dare say you know best. Now, if you'll excuse me, I must check the oven.
A serpent? What do you make of that, eh, Watson?
Well, if we were looking for a worm of vengeance, we might have found one. And if the snake were the sort that kills by squeezing, I suppose it might account for Angel Holland's death. But unless a snake can be trained to ascend a sheer wall, break a window, and pounce upon an innocent victim, I think we should abandon snakes entirely.
Not completely. For the time being, Watson, let us not abandon the tale.
At about 7, Caspar Holland, who had received my message, arrived at the house. He took the news of his father's death bravely and refused to let me take any blame upon myself. His first notion was to put a stop to Inspector String's evening banquet, which he thought a colossal impertinence, until Holmes persuaded him that positive use could be made of this bizarre supper. At 7:30, the inspector and his constable, the 3 servants, Cuthbert the liftman, Holmes and I, sat down to our soup course.
Well, Watson, here we are. And it seems as if our Inspector String has got his dinner party very well organized. See, even my best cutlery is out.
Patience, Holland, dear fellow. Holmes, I think, has something up his sleeve.
Oh, nothing spectacular, Watson. But if Inspector String wishes to give us a display of his brilliance, it would be a pity to miss the entertainment.
I dare say, Mr. Holmes. But I wish he'd not had the effrontery to bring the best wine up out of our cellar.
Will you be saying grace, Inspector?
And you, sir, remind me, are,
Arthur Cuthbert, Inspector. Engineer. I service the passenger elevator.
Are you aware, Mr. Cuthbert, of the seriousness of this business?
Yes, of course.
Then please drink your soup while I proceed. Ladies and gentlemen, in a case such as this, the facts represent the mere surface appearance of the business.
Fascinating, Inspector. And what of the rest?
What is deduced from the facts is what distinguishes a professional Mr. Holmes from, well, an amateur. So, let us take ourselves back to this morning. There are 2 men in the tower, Mr. Angel Holland himself and Dr. Watson. At about 12:30, Dr. Watson goes down in the lift to collect the luncheon tray. When he returns 5 minutes later, the professor is dead from strangulation. Well, what could be simpler? Dr. Watson is obviously the murderer.
Oh, Inspector!
Didn't I say it was so?
Ah, well, Mrs. Fowler, it was not so. That is what I meant about appearances. Is it the case, Dr. Watson, that you dropped the tray of food upon discovering the professor's body?
Why, yes, I did.
I was sure you had, for I found a fragment of crab against the skirting board. Since it did not smell, I knew it must be fairly fresh. Yet, Doctor, if you had dropped the tray as a trick to make us believe the discovery of the body had surprised you, would you have bothered to clear up afterwards? No, you would have left it for all to see.
I say, this fellow's not bad.
But if Dr. Watson did not kill Mr. Holland, how was it done? Well, no one could have got into that tower who was not a first-rate climber. Like Mr. Holland's son, Dr. Caspar Holland.
What?
You thought you'd worked out the perfect plan, didn't you, Dr. Holland? You invite Dr. Watson to take over as your father's bodyguard. Then, when everyone thinks we're at the top of some mountain, you sneak back to the house, scale the tower, strangle your father, and disappear back to your fake holiday.
This is an outrage!
No one but a first-rate climber could have ascended that tower, Dr. Holland, and none but you could have benefited from the death of your father, since everything was left to you. Only you could not wait.
Watson, let me
Holland, old chap, easy now.
Inspector, Dr. Holland is not guilty of murder.
He must tell that to the jury, Mr. Holmes. Pierce, arrest the man.
No, stop that man.
Oh, sir.
The one with the sack. Thank you, Mrs. Callender.
What the devil do you think you're doing? I've been here all day and I've a family waiting for me. Tell this hippopotamus of a woman to let me up. Ow!
Constable, you had better release Dr. Holland. Cuthbert, here is your man.
Mr. Holmes, I'd prefer you didn't interfere.
Hear me out, Inspector. You began your exposition frightfully well. The business of the dropped luncheon tray was a fine piece of deduction.
I'm glad you found it,
However,
sir.
in your haste for a solution, you became impatient with the details. Dr. Holland did not climb the tower. No one could have done. Not without help. And Dr. Watson here provided that help.
I knew it.
But he did not know he was providing it, Mrs. Fowler. And it was not to Dr. Holland. Yesterday, when Cuthbert here went to do his repair work at the top of the elevator, he attached a rope to the lift cage, letting down the other end of the rope from the roof over the side of the tower. His one risk was that someone might see the rope before his plan was carried out. But at that stage, nobody did. This morning, Cuthbert sneaked into the grounds and attached himself to the end of that dangling rope. As the lift descended, of course, the rope was pulled up, hauling Cuthbert up the side of the building. What you saw from the kitchen garden, Mrs. Callender, was no black serpent, but the end of that rope as it was whisked over the parapet. Having broken through the window and strangled Mr. Holland, Cuthbert went back through the hole in the window onto the roof, took his grip again on the rope, and waited until the lift came up again with Dr. Watson and the lunch inside. As it rose, it lowered Cuthbert to the ground. Of course, he still had a task left. To unhitch that rope from the top of the lift cage, which is why he arranged to be here today.
Nonsense. I came here today for one reason, to fit a spare part.
And yet, Mr. Cuthbert, when you arrived earlier, that large canvas bag of yours was all but empty, whereas now it is so bulky you can barely carry it. May we see the contents?
You may not.
Open it, Cuthbert.
If you say so, Inspector. Oh.
Yes. 90 foot of rope makes quite a heavy bundle.
Well, Inspector, who is right? Mr. Holmes or yourself?
You are right, Mr. Holmes. I jumped to conclusions. One should never do that. Clap the bracelets on him, Constable.
Oh, and the man's name, I think you will find, is not Cuthbert, but Lazlitt. Remember, Watson, how you told me when Lazlitt died on that mountain he left a widow and a 10-year-old son? Well, this is the son. It was he, not the mother, who finally got his revenge. It took him 20 years. Judging by the look on his face, it's not half as sweet as he had hoped.
After I'd helped Holland to lay out his father's body, Holmes and I sadly took our leave. I suspect only the servants took any comfort that evening, finishing off the meal which Mrs. Callender had been persuaded to prepare, and the several bottles of vintage wine which Inspector String, in a moment of glorious confidence, had ordered up from the cellar.
In The Battersea Worm, you heard Simon Callow as Sherlock Holmes and Nicky Henson as Dr. Watson. Caspar Holland was played by John Fleming, Angel Holland by Keith Drinkle, and Cuthbert by John Webb, with Ginny Mears as Mrs. Callender, Kate Binchy as Mrs. Fowler, Jonathan Taffler as Inspector String, and David Holt as Jethro. Other parts are played by members of the cast. The Unopened Casebook of Sherlock Holmes was written by John Taylor and directed by Peter Hutchings.
That was the last of our Sherlock Holmes stories, but if you'd like to reacquaint yourself with all 6 of these extraordinary adventures, you'll be interested to know that the Unopened Casebook of Sherlock Holmes by John Taylor is available in book form, published by BBC Books. And next week here on Radio 5 at the same time, we're starting a new story called Goldfish the Movie.
What would you pay to see an Englishman's legs? In Japan. These legs belong to Gary Lineker, and it could mean a free trip to Nagoya as just one of Radio 5's priceless prizes. For your sporting chance to win, join Danny Baker's Morning Edition from Monday at 6:30. It's the greatest ever giveaway from Radio 5.
£10 News and Sport with Ricky Salmon and Hepburn Harrison Graham. An agreement aimed at freeing Russia from its constitutional paralysis has been reached between President Yeltsin and his chief political rival, Ruslan Hasbulatov. Mr. Yeltsin has told the Congress of People's Deputies, which is sitting in emergency session for a 3rd day, that he's prepared to drop his plan to go to the people next month in a national referendum. But he said this would depend on Congress agreeing a deal worked out with Mr. Hasbulatov to hold early presidential and parliamentary elections. At home, the government's coming under pressure again from Conservative MPs over pit closures. Members of the Conservative coal group in the Commons want fresh assurances over the fate of 12 pits, given a reprieve under the White Paper last week. It follows remarks by British coal executives that some of the pits could close within a year if new markets are not found. The chairman of the 30-strong group, Winston Churchill,